Hello. So in this video, we're going to talk about W.B. Yeats and Lady Gregory's play, Cathleen the Houlihan. This is an Irish nationalist play from 1902. Both Yeats and Lady Gregory were central figures in the Irish nationalist cause from the late 1800s into the early 1900s, and particularly they were central to what's sometimes called the Celtic Revival, which is basically a sort of broad cultural movement where Irish nationalists attempted to create cultural nationalism alongside, or in some instances, as an alternative to pushes for political nationalism or political liberation. So Cathleen the Houlihan is set in 1798, which is an incredibly important year in Irish history. There was a rebellion against British colonial rule in Ireland that saw the joining of both Catholics and Protestants in mutual support of Irish independence and throwing off the yoke of British oppression. This play revolves around that, right? This play is set at that time, and it essentially is a sort of moderately allegorical argument that proper Irish patriotism will involve Irish men and women, although that's less central to this, and we can talk about that if we want to, but will involve Irishmen especially sacrificing themselves and their welfare, the welfare of their families, etc., for the cause of Irish independence. It's put in a more positive way than that, but so basically you have this family, the Gillane family, Peter and his wife Bridget and their sons Michael and Patrick. Michael is about to get married to Delia Cale, who apparently comes from quite a wealthy family, in contrast to the Gillanes, who are very poor. And so Peter has managed to obtain from the Cahill family £100, which in 1902 would be a massive amount of money, just huge, especially for a poor farming family like the Gillanes. Peter is thrilled with this. Bridget is thrilled with this. Although she's more interested sort of in the marriage itself than necessarily the financial rewards. Michael is pretty pleased to be marrying Delia, but poor old woman arrives at their house, cottage, whatever it is. And she starts talking about how all of these people, and so she first starts talking about all of these losses that she's sustained. She says, "I've traveled far, very far. There are few have traveled so far as myself, and there's many a one that doesn't make me welcome. There was one that had strong sons I thought were friends of mine, but they were shearing their sheep and they wouldn't listen to me." So she talks about her travels and how difficult it has been to find people willing to help her. Bridget, shortly after this, Bridget asks her, "What was it put you wandering?" And the old woman says, "Too many strangers in the house." Bridget says, "Indeed, you look as if you'd had your share of trouble." The old woman says, "I've had trouble indeed." Bridget says, "What was it put the trouble on you?" The old woman says, "My land was taken from me." Peter says, "Was it much land they took from you?" The woman says, "My 4 beautiful green fields." So there's two important things here that no Irish patriot in 1902 would have missed. The reference to too many strangers in the house was, of course, a reference to the British occupying Ireland. That is, non-Irish people, the British, being strangers in the house that is the island of Ireland. And then the other was the reference to the 4 beautiful green fields being taken. Historically, Ireland has been divided between 4 provinces. Basically, 4 quarters of Ireland is the traditional organization. And the green fields are a very, very old way of thinking about and referring to Ireland. So the 4 beautiful green fields would be the 4 provinces of Ireland, which have been conquered and occupied by the British. And so, while it isn't yet established who she is, we're starting to get a sense that in some way this poor old beggar woman represents an idealized or a representation of Ireland itself. And of course, anyone who knows the play, Cathleen Ní Houlihan, anyone who knows the title of the play, Cathleen Ní Houlihan, will recognize that, or probably will recognize that Cathleen Ní Houlihan as such is a symbol standing for free and independent Ireland in much the same way that, for instance, Uncle Sam stands for the United States government, John Bull stands for Britain, Marianne stands for particularly Republican France, etc., etc. This tradition of using anthropomorphized figures to represent a culture or a society and its ideals is, of course, a very widespread one. And Cathleen Ní Houlihan is an Irish equivalent of that. She also talks about how many people have sacrificed their lives for her, how many people have fought for the love of her. A red man of the O'Donnells from the north and a man of the O'Sullivans from the south. And then there was one Brian that lost his life at Clontarf by the sea, and there were a great many in the west, some that died hundreds of years ago, and there are some that will die tomorrow. And Michael becomes entranced with this figure. She does at one point, if I can find it, yes, she does at one point say, "Some call me the poor old woman, and there are some that call me Cathleen, the daughter of Houlihan." So she does at one point, very late in the play, announce herself as Cathleen Ní Houlihan. But by this point, Michael, the oldest son of this family, who is supposed to get married tomorrow to this rich dude's daughter, he has become entranced with Cathleen Ní Houlihan, and he decides that he is going to go with her. They've been hearing these cheers from outside, and at one point, Peter and Bridget send their younger son, Patrick, to find out what the cheering is about. And what he goes down to the town, and he returns and basically says the French are landing, which the French joined with the Irish in 1798, partially out of a long-standing French-British antipathy, partly because by 1798 you had revolutionary France, and they were eager to support revolutionary movements in other parts of Europe, particularly a place like Ireland, because that would be troublesome to the English, who were, of course, again, a traditional enemy of the French. So the French arrived, and a number of Irish people rose up to try and overthrow the English. It was not successful. But Michael would not have known that, of course. So Michael decides that he is going to go and fight for Ireland, fight for Cathleen ni Houlihan in this rising of 1798. But the audience in 1902 would have known that the 1798 rebellion was not successful, if for no other reason than that they were still living under the British Empire at the time. And so this is where the play gets a little bit sort of potentially problematic, right? Because on the one hand, so you have Cathleen ni Houlihan, who's presented as this suffering old woman, this suffering person who has had everything taken from her, and she just wants back what is rightfully hers. Her cause is just. Many people have tried to help her out. It's worth mentioning, unsuccessfully. And so she is this sort of figure of downtrodden, suffering, occupied Ireland. And then you've got Michael, who in this play sort of figures as the ideal Irish patriot. Because again, he is someone who is willing to sacrifice his own safety by going into the fighting involved in the 1798 rebellion. He sacrifices his family, both in the sense that he is not going to marry Delia because he's going off to fight in this conflict rather than staying for his wedding. But also he probably sacrifices the Ghislaine family because without that wedding, they're going to have to give back the £100, which was really, really, really going to help them out as an impoverished, struggling family. So he sacrifices both his future family in his marriage and his existing family in the financial loss that comes with that, et cetera, et cetera. So the idea of sacrificing for Ireland, sacrificing for the freedom of the nation, sacrificing in the struggle for colonial liberation, all of that is very admirable. One thing that becomes problematic about it is, again, that the audience in 1902 would know that the rebellion fails. And so Michael is sacrificing himself and his family for something that ultimately will not achieve the desired aim. And the play glorifies this, right? This is the ethical thing to do according to the play. And so that raises these interesting questions about the ethos of winning and losing, the ethos of sort of results-based way of assessing a historical action versus an ideological or a symbolic approach to assessing it, right? Like, is it more important to foreground the political failure to gain independence in 1798, or is it more important to foreground the spirit of Irish nationalism and patriotism that was represented by those who fought and died in the conflict? The play definitely leans toward the latter. And part of the problem with this is that it encourages a worldview in which sacrificing oneself is the ultimate ethical position, regardless of the outcome of that sacrifice. And that's very understandable from the perspective of a colonized nation trying to gain independence. It's also a very potentially bloody approach to looking at the issue. And I don't think the play fully reckons with that. I think there is a lot of patriotic thumping of the chest and saying, rah, rah, Ireland. What there isn't is, what does it actually mean for people to spill their blood and not get an independent Ireland?